Thank you very much, everyone, for coming. This is our second session of this year. I'll just introduce myself, then go through some house keeping rules, and then I'll introduce Riyaz, and then, yeah. Okay, so my name is, most of you know me here, students. My name is Dr. Mansoor Ali. I'm a lecturer here in Islamic Studies. I work on practical theology and also on ethics, bioethics. So currently I am researching the presumed consent and organ donation and Cardiff Muslims' take on that. We don't have a drill today, so if the fire alarm goes on off, then it's real, and then there are exits on both ends of the corridor. The seminar is going to last about, Riyaz has a 46-minute presentation to be precise, so then we can have 14 minutes of discussions afterwards. If everyone can put their phone on silent or turn them off, that would be good. Okay, so most of you have got the leaflets in front of you. I'm going to go off script a bit and talk about Riyaz. Riyaz, in 2004, he graduated from with a first-class degree in English literature and subsequently worked in public sector communications for several years. However, he felt a calling for a vocation in academia in 2012, and in 2012 was successfully awarded the prestigious Jameel Scholarship for postgraduate study here at the Centre for the Study of Islam in the UK at Cardiff University. Currently, he is coming to the end of his PhD on how religion is transmitted to second-generation Muslims in the UK, of which we may hear shortly. Alongside Professor Sophie Gillett-Ray, I also supervised Riyaz's PhD thesis, and I know that Sophie will agree with me when I say that Riyaz was a model student. With much pleasure and joy, we supervised him. Riyaz is witty, funny, and a master wordsmith. His infatuation with the eminent sociologist of religion, Professor Peter Berger, has led him on a mission to make burger halal. In other words, to employ some of the incisive observations of Peter Berger to Islam. His contribution to academia does not only lie in his immediate research on Tablighi Jama'at, rather his contributions are wider on the level of theory and methodology. Very early on in his PhD, Riyaz came to the realization that the methodological tools employed by sociologists of religions were not helpful to understand a religion like Islam, as they were born out of sociologists' experience of Christianity in the West. Riyaz tries to remedy some of this in his PhD thesis. When Riyaz started his PhD, he confessed that he is methodologically an atheist. Towards the end of his PhD, he has converted to methodological agnosticism. It is my solemn wish, and I can only hope, that sooner rather than later Riyaz will find true methodological faith. Riyaz has also been involved in various interfaith initiatives at both local and national level, and regularly presents the Islamic perspective on a range of issues at monthly faith events. He is a co-founder of Think Bright Services, an organization set up some years ago to enhance public understanding of Islam in Britain, and which facilitates cultural awareness training and visits to mosque for a range of public and private sector professionals, students, and members of the general public. Finally, Riyaz is a self-confessed pognophile, a word which he introduced to me. A pognophile is a person who is infatuated with beards. Riyaz's follicular fixation can be observed in the witty titles of papers he has delivered, such as Black Beard, White Beard, and 40 Shades of Grey. Ladies and gentlemen, Riyaz Timol is the new scholar on the block, and we are honored that he can join us today. Please give him a round of applause.
Thank you for that. And I think you're going to see some evidence of my pognophilia in some of the slides which I've got today. So you'll see that he's not making things up. Ladies and gentlemen, friends and colleagues, thank you so much for honouring me with your presence today and for being here. I must say it's a bit strange for me to be stood on this side of the podium and looking out at the audience, when for the last 4 years, when I've been in Cardiff, I've been sat on the other side as a member of the audience, as a student of the Islamic Centre, looking at the various speakers who we've been treated to. And so I think that's a sign that the journey of the last 4 years, just speaking with Syra, who was actually in my interview panel for when I applied for the Jameel Scholarship. And so I think it's a sign that the journey of the last 4 years has finally wound to a close. And I'm absolutely delighted and honoured that the Islam UK Centre have asked me to present my findings to you today. Just before I get into the actual presentation, 2 quick points I want to make. The first is that you'll probably notice that I'm going to be reading quite a bit from here. The reason for that is it's a type of discipline that I've imposed on myself through experience at academic conferences, because for anyone who knows me, I do have a tendency to go off on tangents and to use more words than I need to. And so using a script disciplines me and forces me to say what I need to say within the time that I've got to say it. So hopefully I should be able to stick to the 46 minutes that Mansour mentioned at the beginning. If I stick with this, if I go off on tangents too much and look away and start speaking, then it might be a bit longer. So I might have to skip a few slides as well. The second thing I want to say is, as a public seminar or a public lecture, I've attempted to strip out as much academic jargon as possible from this. And the reason for that is just to make it as accessible as possible to as many people. So if you've never heard of Tablighi Jama'at before, or you don't really have a background in Islam in contemporary Britain, should be fine. It should just be reasonably accessible to anybody. So having said those things, I will proceed with today's session. Okay, so I'm going to begin. As a graduate of English literature, I feel slightly qualified or justified in beginning with quoting some poetry. The victim is William Blake, and this is one of his most famous stanzas. To see a world in a grain of sand and a heaven in a wild flower. Hold infinity in the palm of your hand and eternity in an hour. Now, my object here is very simple. When I'm confronted with the challenge of shoehorning into 45 minutes or 46 minutes, the fruits of 4 years of work, of study, I feel as if I'm obliged to squeeze a world into a grain of sand or eternity into an hour. Inevitably, there's going to be some simplifications, some superficiality, and to a certain extent, a lack of nuance. I mean, it's impossible to have footnotes in a lecture, and those poor souls who've been condemned to wade through my thesis in order to examine it will quickly find that it's littered with footnotes. And so with those caveats, I will try in the time that we've got before us in the next 46 minutes to give you a concise summary of what my work involved and what my findings were. Spiritual Wayfarers in a Secular Age, the Tablighi Jama'at in Modern Britain. That's the title of my thesis, and it's also the title of today's lecture. Now, what is the Tablighi Jama'at, which, by the way, I'm just going to call TJ from now on for the sake of brevity? One of the things that I've found when presenting my work at various academic conferences over the past 4 years has been the different reactions that I've got from different audience members. Many Muslims, on the one hand, have some awareness and experience of TJ and often hold strong opinions about the movement, either critical or supportive. Many have been surprised, for example, that what they perceive to be a simplistic grassroots movement that focuses only on the basics of Islam can somewhat paradoxically, it seems to them, be the subject of doctoral research. Many non-Muslims, on the other hand, have very often never heard of TJ and have no prior knowledge of what it involves because it, by and large, functions within Muslim communities. So my presentation today is going to try to accommodate what I presume to be differing levels of audience knowledge. Now, TJ is a grassroots Islamic movement that originated in British India in 1926 through the activities of a charismatic Sufi teacher called Maulana Muhammad Ilyas Kandahalvi. That's a rare photo on the left. He devised a method through which ordinary Muslims form small groups of between, say, 6 to 14 to tour the mosques of far-flung villages, towns and cities for weeks or even months at a time. During an outing, which is called khuruj in Arabic, so that's a term that I'll use quite a bit, it basically refers to groups of Muslims who are out on a TJ tour and travelling from mosque to mosque. TJ activists engage in a series of scriptural and spiritual rituals aimed at self-rectification called Islah, but their main energy is channeled towards mission called Da'wah. The remit of TJ, however, is entirely internal. They do not proselytize non-Muslims, but instead focus on strengthening the faith of existing believers. TJ was internationalized in the years following Ilyas's death, and today is said to be active in almost every country with a significant Sunni Muslim presence. Commentators never fail to mention that the movement's gargantuan annual convocations, called Ijtima', held in Raiwand in Pakistan and Tongi in Bangladesh, attract the largest gathering of Muslims anywhere on the planet outside of the Hajj pilgrimage to Mecca. And that's an annual occurrence. We've just had the Tongi one about 3 weeks ago in Bangladesh, and the Raiwand one was in September, I think. and they attract several million Muslims. Further, the academic literature frequently refers to TJ as the largest movement of Islamic revival in the world. Though it's notoriously difficult to quantify membership given the diffuse nature of activism, the Pew Forum on Religion and Public Life have estimated between 12 to 80 million regular participants, including part-timers. So what's the history of TJ in Britain? TJ came to the UK in the context of mass economic migration following the Second World War and set up a strong base for itself predominantly amongst the South Asian diasporic community, for many of whom it provided a familiar set of religious resources to help ease the transition into a very different culture. Over subsequent decades, it established a robust infrastructure that today boasts the European headquarters of the movement, based in Dewsbury in West Yorkshire, and 5 regional headquarters in London, Birmingham, Blackburn, Leicester, and Glasgow. So that's a diagram from my thesis in which I map spatially the key TJ sites in the UK. Rooting their activities in hundreds of mosques around the country, young itinerant TJ preachers, the British-born children of early immigrants, have today become a ubiquitous sight within British Muslim communities. Yet, paradoxically, and for a host of complex reasons that I won't go into here, the movement remains severely under-researched. That said, TJ did attract international attention recently with its plans to construct a mammoth new headquarters in London, which, had the plans been approved, would have become the largest place of worship anywhere in Europe. The controversy surrounding this proposal led to a PhD, conducted by Zacharias Pieri, which has now been published as a book on the contentious politics of what has been termed the London megamosque. My own PhD, on the other hand, has sought to examine the everyday lived experiences of ordinary TJ activists based largely in the northwest of England. I wanted to understand better the way in which TJ is appropriated today by second and third generation British-born Muslims raised in a predominantly secular socio-cultural milieu. I wanted to know what motivates contemporary TJ activists to pursue lifestyles which, from one perspective, are profoundly countercultural. I'm also interested in what their experiences can tell us about the modalities through which religion and secularity intersect in contemporary Europe. Now, having provided some basic background, I'm just going to explain the structure of today's session. There's basically 3 elements which I'm going to cover in the next half hour or so. First is the methodological. So for anyone who's conducting ethnographies, you might just find it useful generically. What did I do? How did I do it? How did I generate my data? I'll cover those aspects. Secondly, I'll move on to the empirical. What did I find? And what did my respondents tell me? And lastly, I'll move on to the theoretical, which is extrapolating the significance of the empirical for the broader research questions which I just outlined. An intra-religious conversion emerges as a key motif of my findings here, which again, I'm not going to be able to go into in great detail, but I will attempt to give you some of the key findings there. So let's begin. I'll start with the methodological, move on to the empirical, and finish off with the theoretical, if that makes sense with everybody. Okay, so methodology. Out of the 4 years of my PhD, I spent approximately 18 months conducting fieldwork through a social scientific technique called ethnography. This basically involved 2 elements: participant observation and qualitative interviewing. Participant observation involves taking part in the activities of the research group under study in order to better understand their subjective life worlds. As a result, I actually went out in Khuruj on numerous occasions with different British TJ groups, both locally and further afield. In total, I spent just under 80 days out in the path of Allah, as TJ activists call it, with 10 different Jamaats or groups. This involved numerous weekend tours from Friday evening to Sunday evening to various mosques in Lancashire, which are a staple of the movement globally, as well as 2 10-day tours to Bradford and Birmingham respectively in the summer of 2014. And during this tour, there were many students who were out on their summer holidays, so I got to experience the kind of neophyte experience of TJ, or people experimenting with the movement. And it also coincided with the Muslim month of fasting, Ramadan, in the summer of 2014. Most significantly though, I participated in a full-blown foreign TJ tour for 40 days, termed Chilla in Urdu. Again, it's a key TJ concept. And this tour went to Bulgaria, right on the other side of Europe. Now, the interesting thing about this tour is that our young and entirely British-born TJ group was instructed by senior TJ leaders at the Dewsbury headquarters, where we stayed prior to departure, to travel exclusively by road. As a result, we hired a van and we drove approximately 2,000 miles across Europe, which took us just under a week. Along the way, we stayed at TJ centres or mosques sympathetic to TJ in France, Belgium, Germany, Austria, Hungary and Romania, which allowed me to witness firsthand TJ's international networks of activism. For anyone who's interested in learning more about this trip, I've written up my experiences as a paper called Religious Travel and the Tablighi Jama'at, Modalities of Expansion in Britain and Beyond, which is freely available on the internet. As well as Khuruj, I also participated in the local mosque scheme, which is popularly called the 5 A'mals, in a single Lancashire mosque for 3 months. So on the one hand, I was going out with different groups and visiting mosques around the country and across Europe. On the other hand, for 3 months, there was dedicated fieldwork in a single mosque within Lancashire with the local TJ activists there. This allowed me to interact with TJ activists in more ordinary circumstances, away from the context of a tour, and to comprehend better a plethora of issues relating, for example, to their interaction with their families, their hobbies and their foibles. Incidentally, football, both watching and playing, turned out to be a very popular pastime, or their professional and occupational commitments. While participating in all these activities, I would meticulously and constantly be taking field notes that in total produced around 330,000 words of data. So that's the stuff on my right-hand side, the green. That's just the field notes from my participant observation. Additionally, I took around 380 photographs while in the field and drew over 20 diagrams to spatially map TJ sites and activities. I must point out here that my respondents were all male. Due to the segregated nature of TJ praxis, I was unable to access the masturat, or the female TJ dimension, which would almost certainly require a female fieldworker. Now, all of this refers to participant observation. I also conducted 59 interviews with a range of Muslims that I met on my travels. 25 of these were formal and recorded, which involved a consent form that respondents were required to sign, and the remainder were informal and jotted, often occurring spontaneously in the field, and involved verbal consent and a printed information sheet. The recorded interviews all needed to be painstakingly transcribed, which for anyone who's experienced it is one of the most exciting aspects of conducting an ethnography. Not. This resulted in a further 475,000 words or so of data, resulting in a total data set close to the 1 million mark. All of this data was then fed slowly but meticulously into a software package called NVivo, which many qualitative researchers use to facilitate data analysis. Eventually, a comprehensive coding frame was developed that allowed me to map emergent patterns and analytically draw out a range of multifaceted findings. So the million-dollar question is, or perhaps the million-word question would be better, is what did this huge data set tell me? Before I get into that, I first want to expand upon how my findings can be situated within the broader academic landscape of Muslims in Britain. This is important because academic research does not take place in a vacuum, but needs to develop in conversation with the findings of other researchers who have examined related issues. Most significantly for me, the most influential study of TJ in Britain was conducted by an Indian researcher in the 1990s called Yoginder Sikkan. He captured largely the first generation experience of British TJ, examining its appeal mainly for those British Muslims who had recently been through the uprooting dislocation of migration. As a result, he was quite pessimistic regarding the future of TJ for British-born youth, and because of TJ's heavy infusion with South Asian culture, he predicted that its appeal would dwindle among second and third generation Muslims. His findings then helped to shape my own research questions, which I outlined earlier. Secondly, my findings need to be situated within a broader spate of academic scholarship on TJ internationally. Here, Masood's edited collection, Travellers in Faith, published in the year 2000, remains extremely valuable. However, it now needs to be considered in light of several fresh book-length studies that have been published in the last few years on TJ in very disparate geographical settings. For example, Marlis Janssen conducted extensive ethnographic fieldwork among both male and female TJ activists in the Gambia and has contributed the richest description of the movement in Africa. Farish Noor conducted fieldwork among TJ in Southeast Asia, including the countries of Malaysia, Indonesia, Thailand and Singapore, providing fascinating accounts about how the movement adapts itself in new socio-cultural settings. Jan Ali recently conducted a PhD on TJ in Australia, examining it as a manifestation of what has more broadly been termed Islamic revival in the modern world. And of course, as already mentioned, Zacharias Pieri conducted a PhD on the controversy surrounding the London Megamosque. The gestation of my thesis therefore took place in an academic landscape that has been shaped by all of these accounts, and my findings need to be situated within this broader corpus. Lastly, I want to mention the broader literature on Muslims in Britain more generally. Here, the work of Philip Lewis, both his Islamic Britain, published in 1994, and his more recent Young British and Muslim, published in 2007, should be mentioned as influential contributions. Sophie's 2010 book, Muslims in Britain, An Introduction, also provides an excellent bird's eye view of the various Islamic movements. I have to say it's excellent because she's my supervisor and she sat there. But it is excellent. Of the various Islamic movements of both South Asian and Middle Eastern provenance, animating British Muslim communities today, as does Ron Jeeves's older PhD, Sectarian Influences within Islam in Britain. Innes Bowen, though not an academic but a BBC journalist, has also produced a recent book that has caused some discussion on these topics. And very recently, only in the last few months, we have been graced with contributions by two young scholars, Dr. Sadiq Hamid and Annabel Ing, which have enriched our understanding of the diverse landscape of British Islamic activism, with particular reference to such movements as the Hizb ut-Tahrir, the Young Muslims UK, or the Salafiyah. Yet what becomes notable here, though, is that since Sikken's study of British TJ in the 1990s, there has developed a significant subsequent lacuna. In other words, while other movements in the landscape of British Islam have received considerable, some would say disproportionate, academic attention, TJ has characteristically, quietly and without fanfare, apart from the anomaly of the London Megamosque of course, continued to animate significant sections of the grassroots. Yet this, by and large, has not been documented in the academic literature. With these comments, I'm now in a position to present some of my findings. Here we go, pognophilia. So my empirical findings chapters focused on two interrelated themes: intergenerational transmission in British TJ, located within the broader framework of Muslim identity evolution in the West. I coined some terms here. The relevant heading in my thesis is called Between the Old Guard and the Avant-Garde, TJ as a Movement in Transition. By the Old Guard, I'm referring to first-generation Urdu-speaking elders who tend to have white beards and are very influential at the institutional level of British TJ. By the Avant-Garde, I'm referring to second and third generation British-born TJ activists who speak English as their primary lingua franca and who are much more comfortable with the wider social context in which their religiosity is actualized. Oh, and they also tend to have black beards. It's worth pointing out here the importance of the beard to TJ identity. Any committed activist will have a beard at least a fist length long in explicit emulation of the Prophet Muhammad. Now, if anyone's read Ziauddin Sardar, it becomes quickly apparent that he's fascinated by Muslim beards and anatomizes them in excruciating detail in ways which are quite funny. Here, however, the colours of the beards I've mentioned are actually quite important and not meant to be facetious in any way, as they provide an important marker of intergenerational transmission. One of the ways I was able to map the avant-garde presence at the grassroots level of British TJ was simply by observing how many black beards as opposed to whites were present in TJ gatherings. I'm going to skip that to save time. Analysing the biographical traits of my respondents provides further important data. So, 25 formal interviewees, 18 of them were British-born and 17 of them had participated in a 40-day Khuruj outing. So what I've done in this chart is mapped the age at which the very first 40-day TJ outing was undertaken along with the year. And that just gives some information. As a qualitative study, it cannot claim to be representative. However, it's still useful and provides insights. And so what becomes apparent from this is that there's a stream of British-born youth in their late teens participating in 40-day TJ outings with a bit of a peak in the late 90s. But again, it's not representative. And this finding was corroborated by independent sources of data also generated through participant observation. For instance, during my stay at the Dewsbury headquarters in 2014, I found it was teeming with groups of youthful British-born Muslims from across the UK, many of whom were out on a 40-day khuruj during their summer holidays. Similarly, on my return to the Dewsbury headquarters from Bulgaria in late December 2013, I again found it was full of groups of youthful British-born Muslims, mainly out on a 10-day khuruj during their Christmas holidays. On both occasions, as you can see in this photo, the massive upper story of the complex had been opened to accommodate the large number of visitors, and it became clear that the peak periods of annual TJ activity, during which time hundreds of mosques around the country simultaneously host visiting TJ groups, coincide with the holiday periods of students, Christmas, Easter and summer. Now, it seems quite clear that the bulk of youth participating in these TJ outings will not go on to become dedicated activists. A good number may remain lifelong sympathisers, retaining fond memories of their youthful time out on Jamaat, while others may become indifferent to the movement as they proceed through the various stages of their adult lives. A small number may even become hostile critics as they experiment with other movements that are ideologically opposed to TJ in the bustling marketplace of British Islam. Now, a crucial point to note here is the difficulty of mapping the impact of a TJ tour on the subsequent life trajectory of an individual who may never participate in the movement again. For instance, a teenage college student may participate in a 40-day khuruj during his summer holidays, as a result of which he grows a beard and remains committed to his 5 times daily salah throughout the rest of his life, even though he never participates in another TJ activity. Don't worry, I'll read that quote out. This point was driven home to me during an interview with Noorul, a 25-year-old British-born Bangladeshi from Bradford, who participated in a single 40-day khuruj outing when he was 16 years old. He thoroughly enjoyed this experience as a young school leaver. However, he subsequently became disillusioned with what he termed the repetitious simplicity of the TJ message, and he therefore stopped participating. When I interviewed him 9 years later, he worked for an Islamic charity, still had his beard, and was committed to his daily prayers. He recounted to me, in the following words, his youthful experience of TJ. He says, "When I look back on it, alhamdulillah, I found it very spiritually fulfilling. You know, getting away from the environment, spending time away. It gave you time to reflect that, look, you know, it's not about making money. They always talk about in TJ, what is success and the notions of success, like whose version of success. And the narrative that TJ was offering was taking it back to the Prophet ﷺ. And the Prophet ﷺ was a man who lived in poverty, and that was a source of pride for him. So it was good, and that's had an impact on me. So like when I look for a job, money is not that important. I know that money does not equal happiness. Money does not equal success. And so that's had a massive impact on me, even until today. Like I won't take a job, or even because I'm working on this charity, the pay's not great, but it's more fulfilling spiritually, socially, you know, all of that thing. Because one of the things that TJ drilled into me, that life is short, mortality is imminent, and you've got to make your decisions wisely. And when I look at a lot of other people, even my own friends, I see that they're living life, but that concept, that bigger picture is not there. And that's something that TJ drilled into me, yes. So I just thought that was useful to get a map of somebody who participated 9 years ago and subsequently has been completely disengaged, but he's still acknowledging the impact it had in shaping his outlook on life. Unlike Noorul, however, a minority of youth who spend time on a TJ Khuruj do go on to become dedicated activists. Another key milestone on the journey of intra-religious conversion, which we'll come on to, emerges here. The 4-month-long continuous Khuruj to the movement South Asian headquarters. This graph maps the experiences of those British-born TJ activists still strongly committed to the movement at the point of interview in 2014. What becomes clear is that the signature 4-month Khuruj takes place mostly in the early to mid-20s, unlike the late teens of the first 40-day outing. This seems to accord with the general policy of TJ elders, who usually insist that a neophyte undertakes at least 1 or 2 local UK-based chillas, coupled with prolonged periods of local work before permitting the grand 4-month Khuruj to South Asia. Now, I've got a slide on the TJ's resilience or resistant to burnout. Burnout is something which has been identified in several revivalist movements on the landscape of British Islam. It basically signifies a zealous conversion experience which after several years it fizzles out and there's several reasons for that. And it's definitely discernible within TJ also for a range of reasons. But what I'm going to do is not spend too much time on this because our time is limited, but having acknowledged that it is there, I'm going to focus on the core cohort of dedicated British activists who have maintained a serious commitment to TJ over several decades. And the reason for that is quite simply because they are not represented in the academic literature. And so, though peaks and troughs in activism are to be expected over an individual lifespan, my data strongly affirms that a core cohort of activists belonging both to the old guard and the avant-garde have successfully maintained a serious commitment to TJ's normative praxis over several decades. This has involved juggling the demands of a full-time job and growing families with daily and weekly gusht or da'wah in their own locality, regular monthly weekend TJ outings, and annual 40-day khuruj to countries around the world. Over the years, this can lead to an astounding catalogue of countries visited on TJ tours. For instance, 8 out of my 25 interviewees worshipped in a single Lancashire mosque, just one mosque, 7 of whom are British-born members of the avant-garde. When I asked them to simply list the various countries that they had each visited on a minimum 40-day TJ's tour, I was able to collate the following responses: India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Romania, Bosnia, Kosovo, Belgium, Germany, Denmark, Sweden, Greece, Argentina, Australia, New Zealand, Fiji Islands, Indonesia, Canada, America, Holland, Finland, France, Spain, Panama, Kuwait, Barbados, Trinidad and Tobago, Brazil, South Africa, Venezuela, Italy, Spain, the Philippines, Saudi Arabia, Bulgaria, Austria and Malta. Each of these countries, as I stated, has been visited over the years on a minimum 40-day tour by only 8 activists who worship together in a single mosque. What all of this indicates is that some form of intergenerational transmission between the old guard and the avant-garde has certainly been successful in British TJ. And I think it would be safe to assume that there are more British-born activists today than first-generation migrants, though the latter certainly remain much more influential at the level of the movement's institutional hierarchy, at the level of decision-making. As such, I think TJ should best be characterised as a movement in transition. Both old guard and avant-garde elements currently coexist, along with significant pockets of non-South Asian participants, who tend to have a greater presence in the more ethnically diverse cities of the South, such as Birmingham and London. Intergenerational transmission in British TJ, I would therefore argue, should be located within broader processes of indigenization operative in British Islam more generally. So, just to recap briefly, we've covered the methodological, we've covered aspects of the empirical. I've simply missed out large sections. Anyone who wants all the gory details will have to wait until the book is available in hardback edition. But I've just been able to, some of the more salient findings, present them in a very kind of condensed form. But let's quickly move on to the theoretical before Mansour chops my time off. So intra-religious conversion emerged as a key motif of my findings when I was attempting to extrapolate the theoretical significance of what I was coming. So what do I mean by this term? To illuminate, I'm using a quote by the French scholar of Islam, Olivier Roy. He says, in contemporary Islam, as in Christianity, there's a common type of born-again believer who suddenly crosses the boundary between a cultural and nominal religion to the status of a true believer, or more precisely, an absolute believer. A born-again believer is not simply a mosque-going Muslim or a church-going Christian. It's somebody whose faith suddenly becomes the central principle of their entire life. Now, in mapping this experience, what I've done is I've constructed a theoretical framework, which I'll get to. But what my interviews found, again and again, is that nominal or superficial attachments to religion, which I would argue are rooted principally in the primary socialization of childhood, gave way to lifestyles of voluntary devotion and commitment through the vehicle of TJ. As such, despite the fact that the individual remains within the orbit of a single faith tradition, I think it's still accurate to describe the experiences of my respondents as conversions, because of the deep and profound changes to the individual's sense of self. In fact, as a movement that focuses on da'wah exclusively within Muslim communities, I think it could be argued that the very raison d'etre of TJ is to facilitate such experiences within participants, to map the consistent life-changing trajectories I was told about, and which are immensely complex and multidimensional, I should add. I constructed a theoretical framework that simultaneously draws upon several disparate elements. Here, very briefly, I just want to summarize these without going into too much detail. Firstly, I drew upon Peter Berger and Thomas Luckmann's work in the sociology of knowledge, particularly their descriptions of how the processes of primary and secondary socialization operate in subjective consciousness. Secondly, given the overwhelming emphasis in the sociology of knowledge on the role played by language in constructing worlds of meaning within which individuals are socialized, I complemented their model with Victor Turner's work on liminality and communitas, because it helped me to account for the very real ritual dimensions of conversion. Thirdly, I drew upon Alfred Schutz's work in the phenomenology of consciousness, as this helped me to map the internal wrangling in TJ consciousness that was often reported by respondents. Lastly, I drew upon a broad stock of knowledge in the generic sociology of religion, utilizing insights from existing theories of conversion, such as those contributed by Meredith Maguire, Lewis Rambaugh, or Stark and Lofland, as these certainly have broader applicability than the specific empirical contexts that led to their generation. Again, I'm not going to go into this in more depth here. I've got 3 chapters on that in my thesis. For those of you with some background in the social sciences, this should hopefully be sufficient. For those of you to whom the last few moments was nothing other than convoluted gobbledygook, I can only apologise. Now, mapping the biographical trajectories of my respondents in this way, I identified a number of key push and pull factors that led to a definitive conversion experience. First, confirming more general theories of conversion in the sociology of religion, emerged the importance of affective ties, social relations with local TJ activists, and or positive interaction with visiting TJ groups. Second, the social influence of friends or family members who encouraged individuals to get involved was often an important factor. Third, the precipitating impact of a life crisis or a major event such as a birth, death, or a marriage definitively propelled some activists into TJ. Lastly, a personal introspective journey of spiritual or intellectual seeking sometimes culminated in conversion to TJ. Now, I just want to spend a few moments fleshing out this rather dry schema with some biographical narratives culled from my interviews. Fahad is today a senior TJ leader who, as a fashionable and secular young man in 1990, felt sorry for a visiting TJ group from South Asia who were walking from village to village in the British countryside. They were a Bedel Jamaat. They seemed to him exceedingly simple, yet pious, and as a result he agreed to guide them through the countryside, which he said he knew like the back of his hand. Little realizing that the few days he spent with them would transpire to be life-transforming. He told me, "I thought I was helping them, but didn't realize that I was actually being helped." Abdul Latif is an Egyptian who is today the TJ Amir of an Arab mosque in London. He first became involved in TJ in 2003 after an introspective search and being deeply affected by the exemplary conduct, piety and knowledge of one of his teachers from the famous Azhar University in Cairo. He recalls, "I was born in a Muslim family, but the hidayah, the guidance wasn't there at the time. So I'm staying a Muslim, but I don't feel Islam. Until I felt my life, I started begging to Allah, crying to Allah while walking back from work. I was working in a school as a computer teacher in Egypt. And many times when I walked back at night time, I started looking to the sky and saying, Ya Allah, you want us to search for you. Please guide me to you. And Allah sent to me Sheikh Yusuf. And first time I see him, I felt peaceful. Alhamdulillah, he started taking me to his house every Jum'ah, Friday. Make ikram, make hospitality. Very, very generous person. And he was speaking to us about Iman, Akhlaq, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and Sahaba. Which was like, I have learnt this, but now with muhabba, with love. I felt this going inside me. And so I went 2-day khuruj with Sheikh, and really that was the day where I decided to change my life 180 degrees. Abdul Latif subsequently undertook a 40-day khuruj in Egypt in 2005. And in 2008, he relocated to the UK, where he has remained passionately committed to TJ, albeit in the very different demographic context of Britain's South Asian Muslim majority. Incidentally, while my fieldwork found that vertical transmission from the old guard to the avant-garde within certain segments of the South Asian British Muslim community has been relatively successful, by contrast, what I've termed horizontal transmission from South Asian TJ activists to non-South Asian ethnic groups resident in Britain has been far less successful for a number of reasons, which again, unfortunately, I won't be able to go into here. Just to give you a final biographical narrative. Abdul Rahman, a 27-year-old British-born Pakistani, for him it was the separate deaths of a relative, a grandparent and a close friend, all in the space of a single year in 2008, that triggered an introspective journey which led to TJ. During a very raw and tearful interview, he told me, because before that I'd never really experienced death, you know, only really distant cousins, things like that. Never anybody sort of close, my immediate family. And it just gave me another kick up the backside. It was a wake-up call. And literally my whole life just stopped for about 2 weeks. Then exactly 1 week later, it was a 3-day Jamaat to Lancaster. And that was just, I think, probably the best 3 days of my life, actually. That really was. And we talked in that Jamaat. We talked about so much. There were 4 elders and 4 youngsters between the old guard and the avant-garde. And because the others had recently experienced their family member passing away too. So we actually talked about it, you know, that you never know when you're going to go. And death is just around the corner. And honestly, that was it. It was just the masjid itself and the people in that masjid. It was just an amazing, amazing Jamaat. And I made up my mind that I was going for the 40 days. So these are very powerful, raw, personal experiences which hopefully flesh out the dry schema. And the first one was positive interaction with the TJ group. The second one was personal seeking and also positive interaction. And this has, we've just seen, a life crisis. So I can categorize all of my interviews within these headings. All of this indicates that TJ continues to exercise appeal to second and third generation British-born Muslims raised in a predominantly secular socio-cultural milieu for a range of reasons. While the marketplace of British Islam offers up a number of diverse products for the young British Muslim seeker, one of the key USPs, the unique selling points of TJ, is that it physically extricates the neophyte from the enmeshments of day-to-day life. It's what Barbara Metcalfe calls sacred time. And it provides instead a temporary yet intense religious experience in a closed mosque environment. As such, a number of semantic and ritual mechanisms are set into motion that may well lead to a life-changing intra-religious conversion experience. Again, I've mapped these in meticulous detail in the thesis. I can only signpost towards them here. On the other hand, the rigid simplicity of TJ's methodology, coupled with its dogmatic insistence on the basics, clearly persuades many British youth to opt for other forms of Islamic activism. So, I've got a few slides here which I'm just going to skim over very briefly. When a person becomes involved in TJ, there's recognizable patterns. They begin to pray regularly, attend the mosque. Again, this is limited to the male experience. Obviously, we wouldn't expect females to grow beards. Changing social networks, their friend circle and their social contacts change to reflect their shift in interest. The beard and the dress code changes, generally speaking, and regular khuruj and da'wah. So as we saw that massive catalogue of countries, over the years, dedicated TJ activists who formed a significant segment of my sample regularly did this every year, and over the years that built up to a huge amount of experience. What I've done in my thesis, I'm just going to skim this, I'm not going to read this, is I've identified 3 key reasons. What are the reasons that TJ appeals to people in modern Britain? The first thing that I identified is that it entails a shift in the relationship that the individual has with their religion from a passive consumer to an active purveyor. Okay, Grace Davey talks about the shift from obligation to consumption in terms of contemporary European religiosity. There's some resemblance here, not entirely, but basically what I'm saying is that as a passive consumer, the individual is given religious goods to imbibe or to experience. Whereas when they go in a khuruj or participate in TJ activity, there's an activation of agency which leads to a transition into a state of an active purveyor da'wah. This was very clearly exemplified through the experience of Mu'adh, who is a young London-based TJ activist who he's been involved for 25 years, but he was recalling in 1990 when he first went. And he said, when I learned how to give da'wah, that was the spark for me. And I was moving strides forward and I knew my direction. And so I came back from that time and he started influencing his friends and getting more people involved. So I think that shift in the relationship that the individual has with their religion, from a passive consumer to an active purveyor, is experienced as immensely empowering. The second thing I've identified is the very powerful bonds of love, collegiality and brotherhood. Luqman was actually the Amir of my group, which I participated in, to Bulgaria for 40 days. And he became involved, so this was in 2013 that we went. He became involved as a teenager in the 1990s. And when I asked him what were the key things that attracted you, he said, we had an extended family which had a massive part to play. We had a second family, and for some it was a first family that consisted of about 22 people called the Brotherhood Jamaat. And in there were individuals born and bred in the UK who had spent 4 months in 1993. So these people comforted us, took care of us, helped us in our family issues and problems, fed us, took us out, went on excursions, and Allah used them to help us. And so there's very powerful bonds which are often formed, which are again a key attraction. And the third thing that I've identified is TJ's ability to supply certainty in a world of flux, and specifically in a social context in which the relativization of values and the individualization of lifestyles has become prevalent. TJ can give a sense of certainty and a sense of direction, and it specifically speaks to the particularities of the second generation. If anyone's read Will Herberg's classic study of changing religion in America in the mid-20th century, he talks about the second generation phenomenon, and there's massive parallels there. It's a really useful study to look at if we're trying to attempt to map the religiosity or lack of religiosity or increasing religiosity of second and third generation British born Muslims. And some scholars have pointed out what's termed double alienation, where the second generation feels alienated from the ethnic culture of the parents, but they also feel alienated from the predominantly secular assumptions of the mainstream. And so many turn to Islam as a result, and TJ often provides a vehicle for them to do that. So I'm going to conclude now with two final points. Firstly, how did my personal identity as a British-born Muslim affect my field experiences? Like my respondents, I too sport a beard. I believe in Allah and I pray 5 times a day. They, like me, are children of immigrants that came to this country in the post-war period. Further, like other researchers of TJ, such as Ibrahim Musa and Farish Noor, I was also exposed to the activities of TJ as a college student, and I undertook a 40-day khuruj to Scotland, aged only 17. As a result, I had personal knowledge of TJ prior to conducting fieldwork. In fact, one of the primary motivations for my PhD was to understand better the vehicle through which the intriguing intra-religious transformations I could witness around me were taking place. I thus drew upon a rich tradition of what's been termed indigenous ethnography in conducting my fieldwork, and in conjunction with the Muslims in Britain Research Network, co-organised with my colleague Abdul Azim Ahmed, a full-day conference in September 2014 at Cardiff University that examined just these issues from a range of multidisciplinary perspectives. Again, I can't expand upon this here, but in my thesis I've coined the metaphor of walking the ethnographic tightrope to describe how indigenous research confers both advantages and disadvantages upon the fieldworker that need to be meticulously and reflexively analysed. And finally, this is the final slide, I want to conclude by quoting one of the most eminent sociologists of religion in Britain today, Grace Davey. In her critical appraisal of the conceptual apparatus of the sociology of religion, Davey seems to endorse the utility of indigenous ethnography with the following comment: broadly speaking, the potential of religion to become a positive resource is most easily appreciated by those who know it best. More recently, in her book Religion in Britain, A Persistent Paradox, she laments that at precisely the moment when they are most needed, British people are losing the vocabulary, the tools and the concepts that they require in order to have a constructive conversation about faith. The result, all too often, is an ill-informed and ill-mannered debate about issues of extreme importance to the democratic future of this country. More heat than light is an understatement. Rigorous, evidence-based research, conducted ethically and empathically by those who know it best, may well be a vital antidote to this situation. Thank you very much.